What's up YouTube? John here. John without the H, that is. Today we're going to be working on the setup for the Turbo Timber, e-flite Turbo Timber Evolution, that is. I finally got around to doing it. I've been pretty busy lately, as you've seen, getting the Blue Angels jet set up, which is not an easy feat because that plane requires a ton of effort. But let's go ahead and get this thing started. I'm going to roll the ESC info into this as well, so those of you guys who've been begging me to tell you how to set up telemetry, we'll get that sorted out for you too. So let's go ahead and go to Timber Corner over here and get the Evolution out of the cubby hole. I have three different timbers. I've got the original blue Turbo Timber, I've got the Night Timber X, and I've got the Turbo Timber Evolution. All three fit neatly inside of my little cubbies over here. It's a pretty sweet setup, I can't complain about that. And they dismantle very easily too, so it's like really no problem at all to get them out. And my old plane stand works great for getting the plane to stand up and keep the tail out of my face. All right, so the Evo, the first thing you'll notice that I did in my setup is I actually took an X-Acto blade and tore off the word Turbo Timber Evolution on the side. I just didn't like the way that looked. I thought it was the goofiest looking thing I've ever seen. If you guys can see what I'm seeing in here, I don't know if you can, so I'm gonna go ahead and just take this off my head and I'll point it down so you can see. I am running the stock receiver in this. I am running the stock setup entirely. There's no changes except for some physical adjustments made. So let's go over that real quick before we start putting the plane together. Normally on a Turbo Timber, there's a couple of foam blocks that connect right here from the two halves of the fuselage being put together. On this, I cut those out to improve airflow through the ESC. I also, if you look in here, you can see where I've taken the ESC leads and zip tied them to the carbon fiber rods on the inside of the plane here to get them out of the way of the airflow. And moving these blocks, like cutting them out, also opened up airflow as well. I also glued the block. You can see the ESC moving as it's sitting on a foam block that used to be here. I glued the foam block back underneath and I double-sided taped the 60 amp ESC to that foam block, so it's sitting directly in the airflow now. On top of that, let's see what else I did. I also set up the ailerons for crow. To do that was fun. You actually have to physically remove one of these servo plugs and you have to cut one of them and you have to put a new DuPont connector on it so you can get a servo lead installed on the plane. That way you can get crow. So you don't even have to give up the servo plug system, you just have to cut the aileron Y channel. Actually, you have to remove both of these, as I remember now. You have to remove both and you have to cut one of the leads and then put a new DuPont connector on it. And it takes a couple of minutes to do, but it's totally worth it because then you can get total customization of the mix without really having to worry about giving up anything. You'll also see in here that the AGF servos are installed too. The B11 DLS units, they are all up through the fuselage. I have one in the rudder and I've got one in the elevator. You can hear the difference in how they move too. They sound much nicer because they use much better gearing than and much better motors than the stock servos. Okay, let's get the wings attached real quick. Again, the genius of this system is that you don't have to remove the wing plugs, so you can still keep the convenience of the wing plugs and get crow. So just remember what I said. If you guys need me to take a picture of this and show you later on, like a post or something, I can do that. But literally, like, I'm getting crow and I'm still, like, you can see me plugging in the wing plugs. There's nothing special going on here. I just cut the aileron lead coming from one of the plug, actually both of the plugs, because they're both wide together. I cut the aileron lead and then just plugged it in. And I think it was in the 6th channel or the 5th channel, one of the two. All right, let's go ahead and get the wing plate put on. Another thing I like to do with timbers is I paint the wing plates with enamel paint. This is actually old Tester's paint that I've had since I was in college, like 10 years ago. So I was working on a Chevy Impala from 1994 and had all the paints for it and just never used them. I finished the vehicle a couple of years back. I finally got around to finishing it, but got a use for this old enamel paint. It works really well. It's still liquid, so it still works. I like these Tektron screwdrivers. I can put a link in the description if you guys want them. They're only like $6 a piece, so they're, I say only because that's actually kind of pricey for a screwdriver, potentially. But I like how they feel. The grips are really nice. They give you a lot of torque. So see how nice that looks? Like it ties the whole thing together with that plate. Let's go ahead and get a battery, get this plane connected and started up. We use a 2230 C-Pack to show you the center of gravity and the reasoning for why I've got it set up the way I do. We're also running this on a 13x4 propeller. So this is a much larger than stock prop, and it's a 2-blade using the Night Timber X spinner. Also, just called a timber spinner. It's like 10 bucks, I think, to get one of them. Okay, plug this in. Throttle cut is always on. I never turn it off when I'm in the house unless I'm testing something. Okay. How I position the battery, let's make sure this is pointed down so you guys can see it, is I put this thing in here as far back as it will go. So I shove it all the way back. Now I physically can't move it any further than this. That's as far as it will move. And then strap it down with the included straps. I'm actually tempted to take them out and put some good straps in there. And then put the wiring on the side so that they stay out of the way of the airflow, because it's like really critical that airflow moves through this to keep the ESC from overheating, even with the timing being what it's at right now. All right, the model's set up. Let's go over rates. I'm gonna go ahead and turn on the screen recorder so that you can see what I'm doing. We'll go over rates, and then toward the end of the video, I'll go over ESC setup and all the other fun stuff that you guys have been begging me to talk about for a while. So now we're recording. You can see on the monitor that I've got 150% rates on ailerons, 150% on the elevator, and 150% on the rudder to the right and 135 to the left. If I use anything more than 135 to the left, the rudder will actually bind. It's actually hitting right now, going to the left. As you hear it, I could probably tune that back a little bit. So it's not a pure 150% rate. I wish it was, but there is some mechanical advantage at play here with the position of the rudder. I use the innermost holes on the what do you call it, the control arms. If you get up close here, you'll see I actually chopped off part of that so that when the elevator moves down, it doesn't hit the rudder. Okay, same thing on the elevator. I'm using the innermost holes. No adjustments were made to the ailerons. Those are all stock on the hole positions. I did have to do some adjustments to get the flaps to move as far as they do. So let's go ahead and put this a little closer. You'll see how far these flaps really move. So there's my takeoff setting, and my full flap setting is coming out right now. They come out like barn doors. Look at it from the front. Pretty sweet, huh? And they really slow this plane down. All right, so the flaps had to be adjusted because they are also working at 150% rates. So the flaps actually deploy to 150 and they go back up to 150. So I had to actually remove the flaps. The servos themselves had to be taken out, and I had to position the servo arms so that I could, so that the center point or the up point on the servo movement was set to 150. So I had to put the arm on at that point and then reattach it and then set it up so it would travel completely for 150 deployment, if that makes any sense. I'm not always the best at describing things, so if anything's unclear, just ask me in a comment and I'll be able to type it better than I can speak it sometimes. Okay, let's go into servo setup, and you'll see once more all the travel should be set to 150%, except for the rudder, which is set to left at 135. Everything in here is maxed out as much as it can be. You can also see that I've got reverse thrust, which is aux2. I just need to change the name. On the IX20, you can actually change the names of these servos. So aux2 is thrust reverse. So what I'll do is call it, what is it? Call it rev, and then type it in here manually. Okay, I can't type worth anything. Try again. Could swipe it, but it doesn't always work well. Okay, so we got thrust reverse set up in here so we know what it is. That way when I'm looking at the travel and the reverse in here, I know exactly what it is that I'm messing with. Makes a big difference on this radio. Speed, absolute travel, none of that stuff has been messed with at all. Let's go to mixing, show you guys what mixing is all set up on here. So switch C controls my deflected ailerons, which is also known as aileron drooping. So this gets you full span flaps. I don't fly with this much because the plane is much more prone to stalling like this. However, I do use Crow quite a bit. If you saw the video of me bush flying in front of my house, I used Crow to slip in with some rudder. I'm holding rudder, giving it a little bit of contrary aileron to bring it in, and the plane is dropping while it's slipping, and it's not gaining airspeed while it's doing it, so I can actually come in and land on the hill in front of my house. Crow is so essential for that. I know other people will tell you like you shouldn't need mixes to do things, but I like to, again, push my limits, and part of that is with adjusting mixing and getting the most out of the plane. So I find Crow to be absolutely like 100% one of the best things you can put on a lot of planes. It really acts as an air brake, and it also tends to allow you to get a higher angle of attack on landing. Okay, so the mixing for that is really simple. Use flap to left aileron. Left aileron commands both ailerons to move in this setup. So for deflected ailerons, switch position 1, the rate is -30 to an offset of -100%. That causes them to move at all points, rather than like if I didn't have offset set up, what would happen is, see, they don't work in, like right now they're not working in takeoff mode, but they'll work in landing mode once the flaps get past 0 on the screen here. Once they pass -49 and get to 0 and start counting up from that, that's when they'll start moving. So you need the offset to get them to actually work. See, as I pull the offset, they start dropping. If I push it up, they won't do anything. So the offset is there for that. For Crow, it's a rate of 40% to an offset of -100%. And that gives you a pretty hefty amount of up aileron. I could move it even more to make it 150, but it doesn't really need it. So I don't think I did put a little bit of elevator comp in here actually. So there's a 3% elevator compensation for Crow, and there's a -3% compensation for full span flaps. And that's a mix of flap to elevator. Really simple setup for that. Flap or elevator to flap, this is also called snap flaps. If you ever hear my radio call that out when I go into a hover, this is what you're seeing. As I pull the elevator, the flaps deploy. I know some pilots like to put the plane into like full flaps and then pull back and then pull it up. I prefer the instant response and then being able to turn it off instantly. This is a mix of elevator to flap on switch 1 with a rate of -125%, and that kicks them out pretty quick, but you also have to make a couple of mixes to get it to go that fast, because 125% doesn't always move it at 125%. I could probably use a curved mix and get a very similar result, but this is how I've always done it. So another mix is elevator to flap, and then a rate of -75%, as you can see on the screen. The next one is, what is it, aileron to right aileron, and this one I believe is only active when I have Crow. So what this does is allow me to get more aileron movement within the same level of stick movement. See the difference here? I'm moving my hands the same amount, like if you see here. It just makes the ailerons feel less sluggish, because when they're all the way up like this, if you don't have that enabled, you'll never get them all the way down. So watch when I turn it off. That's what it's like with it off. This is me moving to the ends of the stick. So I'll put this back up here again. Now turn it back on. Oh, touch something else. There we go. Put that down there. Actually put it over here out of the way. Again, I've talked to people who say they don't want to do this. You know, do whatever you want. I'm not telling you what to do. All I'm saying is this is what works for me. And you might get some ideas on what you can do with your planes by working with this idea. This allows you to have a lot more precision and control while you're in Crow or in full span flaps. That's really all there is to mixing. There's a rudder to rudder mix on switch G. That's just if I ever fly in safe. I've got it set up so that the rudder doesn't move all the way. So it keeps me from driving the aileron, or sorry, the wings down further than the safe system can compensate for it. So that's really all that's there for. It's not even really worth mentioning. It's just something I like to play with occasionally if I've got a camera attached to the plane. Real quick, while we're on that subject, let me show you guys what the GoPro mounting system looks like for my plane. I know some of you guys hate CA glue because you don't think it works, but I've had this right here as my camera mount for 2 years now, and it has held up just fine. This is nothing more than a timber wing plate held on with copious amounts of CA glue, and I actually penciled or used a pen or something to, like, it's been 2 years, I'm trying to remember how I did this. I put it on there and I traced around it with like a pen or a pencil, and then I used a Dremel and cut into it until the GoPro mount fit into it, and then I cut off most of the GoPro mount using the Dremel again to get it to be flush with the bottom of the plate over here, like these little bars. And then I used probably half of a bottle of CA to get it to stick. This thing is part of the plastic. It will never come off unless I use debonding agents on it. That's how I swap out. I just go ahead and I undo the screws and I put the camera on that mount right there. It does have an effect on the center of gravity, so it's something to watch out for, but it does work. And that's how you see all my footage being shot whenever I have an onboard timber shot. So most recently you got a view of the airport that I fly at. That's what that comes from. So that shows you how to do it. I mean, or at least gives you the idea behind how to do it. I didn't really think about filming it. This is back before I became like an F-list YouTube celebrity. So I was just setting it up for myself because I wanted to see what it looked like and how to get a view from bird's eye. All right, so that's like literally the majority of the setup on this plane. Let's get into the physical aspects of it too. There's some stuff we need to go over so you guys can see how to get the most out of this plane and to reduce the amount of load that the servos are going to experience. This one I'm gonna have to actually take the wings off for. So I'm gonna show you guys how to lube up the pushrod sleeves. If you don't do this, they're gonna be sticky and the servos are gonna have to work much harder to control the plane. You'll get much more fluid responses, especially with the AGF B11 DLS servos that I put in here, because this is an Avian ESC. It's kicking out 6 volts. That means that the servos are, that's their highest rating is 6 volts. And these servos kick out nearly 3 kilograms of torque at 6 volts. In freedom units, or just in terms of simplicity, 3 kilograms of torque, or 2.8 in this case, actually adds up to a ton of torque. That's more than what this plane weighs. So all of these servos on this plane, from the flaps to the ailerons to the rudder and the elevator, have more authority in terms of kilograms per square inch or whatever it ends up being than the plane actually weighs. So they have no problem moving the plane around. So let's go ahead and get another screwdriver. I need to unhook the pushrod system to show you guys how to do this. So we're gonna go ahead and we'll do it to the, let's see, which one is this? That's the rudder right there. We'll do it to the, yeah, we'll do it to the rudder. That'll be an easier one to remove. The elevator pushrod system's a bit more annoying to work with. So you just undo this just a little bit. You don't have to take it all the way off, just partially. And then pull the rudder back until it pops out. And then you turn the plane over. See how the battery is shoved back about as far as it can get to. I could probably go even further if I cut some of that foam out, but right now we'll go back to the CG in a little bit. Or at least I'll try to remember. But even if I don't go to the CG, trust me, the CG is right. If you can see this, the plane, it's about right here. If you can get it back even further here, it'd probably be one of the best flying planes you'd ever fly, because it's so nose heavy in stock form. You also see in terms of physical setup, this area in the back is very prone to getting messed up and the paint chips off real easy, so I just put red electrical tape on it to give it some protection from the elements. All right, we're gonna go ahead and pop this off. This little clevis. It's one of my least favorite designs of the timber, but it does actually a pretty decently adequate job of holding stuff on there. Okay, we're gonna unhook it from here. You can already see where it's been binding just a little bit. This thing really has a lot of force. We're gonna re-lube this whole thing. So this has been hit with SuperLube. I can put a link in the description. This stuff's super cheap. I've used it ever since I worked at Radio Shack back in my college days. So there's you can see the oil stains on here. It's almost like pulling out a dipstick. Okay, all you gotta do is take a bottle of SuperLube. If I can figure out what I did with mine, there it is. If you guys can see this, it is multi-use synthetic oil with something called syncolon that or syncolon, maybe that's what they're trying to call it. I don't know. It's got a really weird looking, very buff bottle of SuperLube on the front as a logo, so it's interesting. Anyway, here's how I lube up the push rods. This is very, very, very easy, and you will notice immediate improvements in performance with this plane. And if you don't, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you're not using good servos. What you do is you feed, hopefully you guys can see all this, you feed the push rod back into, looks like my hands are shaky, but I'm just not holding close enough. This bar or this push rod's very, very bendable. Feed it right back into that hole, okay? And I use CA glue tips to give me some precision on this thing. Go ahead and just start using a gentle amount of lube. Push it back and forth a little bit. Every so often, just keep feeding it in there, a nice trickle. Keep feeding it in, keep feeding it in. See how simply that slides? Like, I'll shut up for a second, you can hear it. How nice that is? If it's nice for my hand to move through and I don't have to fight it, imagine how much nicer it must be for the servo too. And this applies for the other side, for the elevator. It's a little bit more annoying to do the elevator because there's more stuff in the way. So you just push it all the way in, pull it all the way back out. And if there's any residual oil left over, you can just kind of wipe it away, put it back on the innermost push rod hole, or what do you call it, control hole, servo horn, whatever it's called. There's so many different names for this stuff. The thingy in the back with the hole, put it on the innermost is where I put it. Snap that clevis back in position. Now that the push rod is lubed, see how effortlessly that moves? There's nothing catching on it anymore. There's nothing for it to catch on. Okay, now it should be almost back in position. To get it to go back into the hole, might need a little bit of finagling to get it in there. Let me go ahead and rotate that little servo hole right there. And actually, it's going to be a lot easier if I just take my tweezers. Let's see here. I should have a pair of tweezers on my desk. Aha, there we go. Just didn't anticipate needing these, otherwise I would have had them in my hand already. Okay, just line that up, push this back, use the tweezers to push all the way in. And there we go. Now it's in there. Last thing we need to do is go ahead and reconnect the push rod keeper. Hold the rudder in place. Screw it till you feel a little bit of, actually, real quick, you guys, some of you are probably cringing right now because you saw what I just did, which I forgot to even think about. I did not clean the oil off of this before putting it in there. So make sure you clean the end of this, and you can do that by, you can't see it right now because my paper towel is covering everything, but you can take the rudder push rod all the way out and you can just push it back and run it through a paper towel as you're holding it with your hands, which is what I'm doing right now. And you can get all the lube off of there. There's some extra lube on the paper towel. Then you can take the tweezers and put it back in there so that it doesn't become loose and slippery. Now, like, a loose rudder probably isn't the end of the world, but a loose elevator would be. Like, you can still bank and yank even with a messed up rudder. You don't want to ask me how I know that one, but you really can't do much if your elevator's busted. At that point, you've lost one of your most critical flight controls. Not to say that the rudder is not critical, but you can still do a lot of your flying, banking and yanking. Okay, use like a pair of tweezers to give you some force to screw back on so it screws in nice and tight. Give it a little bit of force, nothing moving loose at all. Now let's see how it moves with the transmitter in my hand. Absolutely 100% perfect. So let's do the CG test again real quick, and then we'll move on to the ESC stuff, and I'll show you guys how to program an Avian ESC. I believe it was Love RC who wanted to know how to do this, so I'll just make a vid and show you guys how to do that part as soon as we're done showing the CG here on this thing. If you have a current generation Spektrum transmitter, this is actually super easy to do. Don't really be too intimidated by Spektrum tech, guys. It is basically the Apple iDevice of the radio control world. There is some complexity to it, but it's generally made for people who just want to get up in the air quick. I'm one of the outliers. I prefer to get maximum performance out of these things, even when it comes to like setup. So I can actually get a lot of really complex setups in my models where a lot of people prefer to just do the whole bind and fly thing. Like, most people aren't going to do what I did to this model and turn it into a full crow system and have snap flaps and everything. A lot of people are just going to bind the receiver and not even bother unlocking it, because I had to unlock it to do a lot of this stuff too, and they're just going to be like, I'm done. The gains are default too, so there's no point in showing you forward programming, because all I did was unlock it and then just copy the gains over and set them to 2x. I can show you the forward programming so you can see what I'm using though, just for the sake of showing everything that's going on with it. All right, let's show you the center of gravity here. So the way I've been flying this plane these days, I'm slightly nose down with, yeah, right here, about halfway through the second cabin window is where I'm nosing down. So that's the center of gravity. It's about right here on the wing. That's almost perfect. I would prefer it to be closer to here, but the plane might act really weird if I do that. Okay, let's show you the forward programming screen real quick while I cover everything on this model. Okay, go to, make sure this is still recording. Looks like it stopped. Okay, cool. Well, no big deal that it stopped. We can just go ahead and start it again. Okay, go to forward programming because we don't really need the rest of that stuff. I'd have to cut it out anyway. Gyro settings, AS3X settings. We set the 2X gain sensitivity, and the roll is what, 40, 50, 60? Oh, that must be, no? Heading. I thought I copied it over. Oh, I did only for the, oh, okay, so I was flying it with the wrong gains. All right, so I didn't actually set this up. I was just using the default gains. So it was 36, 73, 96. So this is the stock setup, 36, 73, 96. So I only did it on the first flight mode, which is safe. I didn't actually copy it over everything else. 36, 73, 96. I use 2x gains, so I'm using, let's throttle up real quick, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. That might be enough to get it to, that'll get it to activate. So back to forward programming. If you go to gyro settings and you go to system setup, or not system setup rather, you go to AS3X settings, capture gyro gains, you will see that all those values that I put in are half. Like roll was 36, now it's 18. That's because my gains are on this slider. When I pull it all the way down, when I pull this slider all the way down, everything goes to 0. When I put it in the middle, everything goes to 18. When I put it all the way to the top, everything goes to 36. Makes sense. Or everything on the roll axis, that is. This is what it looks like full. A little much. Way too much. That would be very sloppy looking in the air. This is what it looks like. I'll go ahead and turn off the recording for this one. We'll come back to it in a second. Advertisements, go away. Oh my gosh, go away, go away, go away. There we go. At midpoints, this is what it looks like. Still a little much. I could probably reduce the gains a bit. And then when it's turned off, obviously there's no reaction from the AS3X system at all. Okay, that covers all of that. Let's go ahead and turn the screen recorder back on. And I'm going to, while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to go ahead and connect the battery once more, because you can't get to the programming menu if the plane hasn't just been started within like the last 30 seconds. There's like a wait time. After that, after like 30 seconds of it being connected, it won't allow the inputs anymore, so you have to restart it to get into that mode. So on any transmitter that's current from Spektrum, you can go all the way over to the Avian Prog menu. You hold down, turn off the flaps, hold down and left. So up and left on the elevator and aileron commands. And then hold up and right. So you just move the stick to the right. Okay, now there's a known bug right now in the iX20 where you can't even read any of this. An easy fix is to go out, come back, and it should be readable. There it goes. Okay, so the flight mode is set to fixed wing. Brake type is set to reverse. This is if you want to set up reverse thrust, you have to do this manually. It should come set up as like normal. Brake type would just be set by going to reverse. So you do this by just moving the stick to the right and left. Move the stick down to brake force 7. That can be whatever you want it to be. If you give it like almost no brake force, it'll just spin on its own. If you give it brake force of 7, the prop stops unless you're giving it input on the throttle. Cutoff type, I've set mine to soft cutoff. This is irrelevant though, because I've disabled the cutoff voltage. I would rather burn a battery pack than burn the airframe. The airframe always costs more than the batteries, unless you're using like platinum level batteries or something. Who knows who even makes those. Voltage is set to 6 volts. You could kick it to 7.2 to get it to kick out 2-cell voltage, but there's really no point in that. So 6 volts is enough, especially for these servos, because they perform best on 6 volts. They move the quickest on 6 volts, and they produce the most torque on 6 volts. Startup time refers to how much time it takes for the motor to spin up when you give it commands. Normal will be instantaneous. Soft and very soft will take a few moments for it to kick up, sometimes up to a second or two. Leave it on normal unless you really want a soft, like gas motor like response and you're trying to train for using a gas motor. Timing is set to 5. If you put it to 15, that's considered mid to high timing. 5 should help reduce the overheating issue that the ESC has. The physical adjustments I made to the ESC position should also do that. Motor rotation is clockwise. If yours is, for whatever reason, spinning backwards, instead of taking the cowling off and rearranging the wiring, you can just change the direction from clockwise to counterclockwise or vice versa. Freewheeling, I think that something related to helicopters. I've never seen it actually do anything, so I don't mess with it. Governor gain is helicopter stuff, nothing to worry about. AR time, I don't know enough to tell you about what it does, but I've never seen it do anything. Same thing for restart. Thrust reverse is what we're really interested in. To set up thrust reverse, you actually have to have the channel assigned to something. On this case, channel 7 has to be assigned. So let's go ahead and exit and tell it to save. It's going to restart right on cue. To get it set up, you have to go to channel assign. It's now expecting an input of channel 7. Channel 7 has been set to switch A. Switch A drives an input of 0 to 100, or sorry, negative 100 to 100. So if you go to the servo setup, you'll see in the travel that thrust reverse is at currently negative 100, which means it's kicking out, it's telling the motor to work in full thrust in the direction it should. And if I kick it on for reverse thrust by flipping the switch, it turns around and goes the other direction. That's all there is to that. Now let's go over the fun stuff that some of you guys probably came to this video for, which is setting up callouts. Do you want your radio to do this?
15.2 volts.
And do it every 30 seconds so you know how much power you've got left. This really applies to IX20 and IX12 radios, but I think you can do this with the older the NX radios and the DX radios. You just won't get it to say whatever you want it to say.
No data.
So let's show you how that works.
0 losses, 100% strength, 2 holds.
That's another telemetry setup that we'll do too. But to get this to work, what you have to do is go to model setup and you go to audio events, you go to custom reports, and on switch E, on the second position here, you set up what is it? For switch E, at least on mine, you can put it on whatever switch you're comfortable with, but switch E position 2 every 30 seconds, which is frequency here.
0 losses,
it will
100% strength,
kick out
holds.
whatever you tell it to kick out. So if you go to macros, you get a whole list of things to work with. RPM volts is found within, I think it's found within, what is it? Flight pack. And then voltage min/max. And that's what that means. That's what RPM volts means, and that gives you the current battery voltage.
15.2 volts.
It will also give you
losses,
that
100% strength, 2 holds.
It will also give you that call out when, like, regardless of what the battery is doing. So if it's being like a lot of draw is being pulled from the battery, it'll tell you exactly what that draw is. So if you go full throttle on a 4-cell pack, you go from 16.8 volts down to whatever it's currently at. It could be 15 volts, it could even be 13. But watch this. You could have it say whatever you want. So battery is at
losses, battery is at 15.2 volts.
You could have it say anything. Honestly, she'll say whatever you want her to say. Really simple stuff.
15.2 volts.
I prefer just the simplicity of knowing what the voltage is. I don't need to hear everything else. On mine, I also have it set to call out the current, what do you call it? The current signal quality. So QoS_F losses, signal strength, and QoSH holds. That all tells me this.
0 losses, 100% strength, 2 holds.
So the 2 holds come from, unplugging the receiver or going into forward programming. All sorts of different stuff can cause a hold, or just crappy connection quality too. That is basically all there is to getting the radio to tell you what your voltage is on a timer. And because the IX20 has
15.2 volts
capacitive touch switches, I should be able to touch this and it will work, but I don't think I set it up. So let's show you how to set that up. If you have an IX radio, this is really easy to do. So we'll go to model setup, we will go to audio events, touch switch reports, add switch E. You can just touch it too and it will take you right to it. Position 2, and we will do $RPM_volts.
15.2 volts.
I could have just used the macro to do it too, but you can type this. Go back and then touch.
15.2 volts, 15.2 volts, 15.2 volts.
Very simple stuff. That's all there is to getting telemetry, so you know what your current battery level is at any point in time. It is amazing to be able to have that on a call out. I personally love it. I use it on all my planes. That's what you're hearing in every one of my uploads. All right, guys, I think that covers everything. If that didn't cover something and you guys want to know what it is, I mean, I went through pretty much what I can think of as everything on this this prop. One of the best models you can get from Horizon. It's not very expensive and it flies phenomenally, especially if you want to do bush style stuff with it. But if there's anything you want to know that I didn't cover, and who knows what I wouldn't have covered, but I'm pretty sure I covered everything, just let me know in the comments and I'll talk about it for you. All right, guys, thanks for watching. See you all next time.